She paid for her first-class seat. So why did the crew ask her to leave for a white man Danica Holmes boarded Flight 842 expecting a quiet journey? A respected business traveler in a tailored Navy pantsuit, she took her place in row 1A unaware her seat was about to become a battleground. When a wealthy white man arrived late and demanded her seat, the crew didn't question him. They questioned her. Why was a poised black woman being asked to move? Why did the flight attendants whisper, but never apologize? What no one realized was that Danica wasn't just any passenger. She was the CEO of the airline. What followed next would shake the industry, fire an entire crew in 5 minutes flat, and spark a movement that would change aviation forever. But behind the headlines is a deeper story of quiet dignity, of a woman who didn't shout, but stood her ground, and in doing so, rewrote what justice looks like 35,000 feet above the ground. What would you do if the world told you to move just because of who you are? If this story moves you, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Now, let's take off into the story of Danica Holmes. Danica Holmes stepped onto Flight AV-207 with the kind of calm that didn't ask for attention but commanded it anyway. Her heels clicked softly along the carpeted aisle of Aerovia's flagship jet, each step deliberate, each movement composed. She wasn't dressed like someone trying to impress. A deep navy wrap coat, minimal makeup, a simple silver ring on her finger. Her hair was styled into a neat bun, her posture erect. Everything about her was quiet precision, no excess, no pretension. Few knew her face, fewer still recognized her name, and that was exactly how she liked it. Danica Holmes wasn't just another passenger in first class. She was the CEO of Aerovia Airlines. But today, she wasn't flying as an executive. There were no press conferences, no boardroom optics, no security detail in tow, just her and her battered leather tote. The same one she'd carried since her early days as a junior analyst fresh out of Howard University. She had come a long way from then, but some things, like silence, focus, and the soft comfort of solitude, never changed. Danica nodded politely to the flight attendants as she entered the first-class cabin. The smell of bergamot-infused air freshener mixed with the muted hum of pre-takeoff conversation. Seat 2A. That was her corner of peace for the next few hours. She glanced at her phone, 4 unread emails from her assistant, a string of Slack messages blinking from the legal team, and one draft press statement she hadn't had the energy to finalize. Later, she thought. For now, she just needed the quiet. As she approached her seat, she slipped off her coat, folded it carefully, and reached down to retrieve her tablet. She planned to reread the proposed diversity audit protocol she had been working on, initiatives she hoped would spark meaningful reform across Aerovia's hiring and crew evaluation systems. The timing wasn't ideal. She had just come from Zurich, where she delivered a keynote speech on ethical leadership in aviation. The speech had gone well, but it left her emotionally drained. Back in Chicago, a closed-door board meeting awaited her, one she was dreading. Danica had always known the air at the top was thin, but lately it had felt suffocating. Some of the board's older members, wealthy, white, male, had voiced quiet resistance to her newest policies. Too radical, too fast, too focused on identity politics. They said they didn't see what she saw or didn't want to. Flight AV-227 was supposed to be her moment of mental clarity before walking into another uphill battle. She turned slightly toward the window and let out a slow breath. But before she could settle into her seat, something interrupted the rhythm. A blanket, gray and wrinkled, tossed almost like a declaration across both 2A and 2B. Then came the voice. "Gonna need this whole row to stretch out." "Sweetheart," the man said gruffly behind her. Danica turned. There he stood, mid-50s, crisp blazer, red-faced from the bar or entitlement or maybe both. He held a sparkling water like it was bourbon, already leaned back like he owned the place. The smirk came next. "Surely you can find somewhere else to sit, if you even have a ticket for this section." Danica blinked. Her fingers tightened slightly on her tablet, but her face remained unchanged. This wasn't the first time someone underestimated her. It wouldn't be the last. She raised her voice just enough to be heard, not enough to draw attention. "I believe this is seat 2A, she said clearly, lifting her phone and showing him the digital boarding pass. The man barely glanced. He scoffed, "You're mistaken." There was an almost rehearsed arrogance in his voice. "People like me," he added, "need space to breathe, space we pay for. Why don't you try back in economy? I hear the legroom's inspirational." Danica said nothing. The words weren't unfamiliar, the tone all too familiar. Still, she didn't move. The cabin had quieted just slightly. A few heads had turned. No one intervened. Of course they didn't. Danica had learned long ago that first-class silence is louder than any scream. People preferred tension over confrontation, comfort over correctness. Her gaze held his, steady, unshaken. But inside, beneath that composed layer, was the slow churn of something deeper. Not rage, not even surprise. Just weariness. She had built a career out of keeping herself steady in storms others tried to pull her into. And still, no matter how many letters followed her name, no matter how many interviews, accomplishments, or audits she passed, there would always be someone who believed she didn't belong. Still standing, she shifted her weight slightly. "Sir," she said, her voice even but edged with quiet firmness, "I kindly ask that you remove your blanket from my seat." Again, she held up the boarding pass. He laughed, the kind of laugh that's meant to belittle. "Oh, come on," he said. "You're really going to play that card? Don't embarrass yourself." Danica exhaled slowly. She didn't reply. Not yet. She looked to the side. The flight attendant near the galley was watching, but frozen, torn. The man in seat 1C had his AirPods out now. He was listening. So were the women in 3A and 3B, peeking between the seats. The pressure pressed in from all sides, but Danica did not yield. This wasn't just about one seat. It never was. It was about something far older, far deeper. She knew it. He didn't. Not yet. But he would. And the plane hadn't even taken off. Danica didn't move. The man's smirk widened as if he expected her to flinch, to apologize, maybe even shrink and walk away. But she stayed exactly where she was, her boarding pass still visible on the glowing screen of her phone. Her silence unsettled him. It was the kind of quiet that made people uncomfortable, the kind that held weight. The cabin, already hushed, seemed to fall into a deeper stillness. The only sound was the soft fizz of sparkling water in his half-empty glass. "I said." The man repeated, louder this time. "This whole row is mine. I need space to rest my back." He laid one hand flat across both seat backs of 2A and 2B as if claiming territory. Danica's eyes flicked to his left wrist, where an expensive watch peeked from beneath a tailored cuff. The kind of watch people wore to remind others what they thought they were worth. "I understand," she said evenly. "But this is my assigned seat." His lips curled into a dry sneer. "You people are always so entitled these days," he muttered, not even trying to be quiet. Danica blinked. Her breath caught for just a second, not out of shock, but from the sheer audacity of how easily that phrase had rolled off his tongue. "You people?" She'd heard it before. 1,000 ways, 1,000 voices, 1,000 coded phrases, and yet it always landed with the same sting. "I'll only ask once more," she said quietly, her voice low but firm. "Please remove your blanket. This is my seat." He didn't even flinch. Instead, he leaned back farther in his chair, as if her presence were an inconvenience, a passing wind. "I paid extra for comfort," he said. "I fly this route every other week. I know the crew, I know the system, and trust me, sweetheart, this row's not for someone like you. Someone like you." Danica felt her stomach knot, but not with fear. It was fury, cloaked in restraint. It bubbled inside, pressing hard against her ribs, but she kept her face calm. She always did. The moment you reacted, they'd say you were angry. The moment you pushed back, they'd say you were difficult. She'd learned that lesson in her first internship when a coworker had referred to her as well-spoken. "For someone like you." She'd smiled through it, just like she was smiling now, though her jaw clenched behind the surface. A movement to her left. The flight attendant, Maya Lynn, was approaching, early 30s, polished bun, calm face, uniform pressed to perfection. "Is everything okay here?" Maya asked, her eyes flicking between Danica and the man in the seat. Danica turned slightly, still standing. "I'm assigned to 2A, she said clearly. "But this gentleman insists he needs both seats." Maya's eyes darted to the boarding pass Danica held up, then to the blanket spread across the row. She hesitated. Danica saw it. A flicker of discomfort. Not uncertainty, just caution. The kind of hesitation people have when they know they're walking into a politically charged landmine and would rather defuse it with a whisper than a stance. "Sir," Maya said carefully, turning to the man, "may I ask to see your boarding pass? I already told her," he snapped. "I have a medical condition. I need space. I paid enough to deserve that." Danica watched Maya stiffen slightly. Her polite smile didn't change, but her eyes hardened a shade. "I understand, sir," Maya replied calmly, "but you've been assigned 2B. This seat 2A is hers." Maya gestured gently toward Danica, as though trying to bring the temperature down. Danica knew what was happening. Maya was trained to de-escalate. She was trying to manage the situation without embarrassing anyone, but there was only one person who should have felt embarrassed, and he was doubling down. "I don't care what the manifest says," the man said, waving his hand dismissively. "I'm not moving. What are you gonna do? Throw me off the plane?" Maya didn't reply. She looked to Danica, almost apologetically, then nodded once. "I'll speak to the flight supervisor," she said quietly and stepped away. Danica stood still. She could feel the shift, that unspoken ripple in the air. The man across the aisle peeked up from his laptop, eyes lingering longer than before. A woman in the second row adjusted her glasses and began typing quickly on her phone. Danica didn't need to guess. They were watching now. They were listening. But still, no one spoke up. The man Colton. She'd soon learn his name, sighed dramatically and took another sip from his glass. "You know, I really hoped this flight would be peaceful," he said. but I guess some people just can't help bringing the drama wherever they go." He looked at her as he said it, full of smugness. Danica tilted her head slightly. "I'm not the one creating drama," she said. "I'm simply asking for what I've paid for." Colton scoffed. "What you people think you paid for," he muttered, voice barely audible but just loud enough. Danica took a deep breath. She could feel it rising in her throat, the urge to say more, to call it out fully, to shatter the facade of civility he was hiding behind. But she didn't. Not yet. Instead, she glanced toward the cockpit. They'd be pushing back soon. Timing mattered. So did perception. Her inner voice whispered, "Choose your moment." Danica. Not all battles need fire to win. She opened her tote bag and gently pulled out a slim notepad. Its cover was soft leather, the pages full of scribbled thoughts, notes, and quotes. On the first page, in small handwriting, was a line she'd copied from her grandmother years ago. "Still, waters are not weak. They are deep." She didn't need to yell. She didn't need to fight, because storms didn't always make noise. Sometimes they moved in silence before they upended everything. She flipped the page and began writing, calmly, as if she weren't standing in a standoff in the middle of first class. Colton blinked at her, confused. The fact that she was still standing there, still silent, still unbothered, was starting to eat at him. "Are you seriously just going to stand there and ignore me?" he snapped. Danica didn't answer. She simply turned the page again, and, with that quiet defiance, she reclaimed her power without lifting a single hand. The hum of the engines deepened. Cabin lights dimmed slightly in preparation for departure. Danica looked up once more and met Colton's eyes, and then she smiled, not warmly, not cruelly, just a calm, knowing smile. It unsettled him more than anything she could have said, and in that moment he realized she wasn't going to back down. Not today, not ever. Danica finally sat down. She didn't say a word to Colton. She didn't even glance in his direction as she tucked her handbag neatly beneath the seat in front of her, adjusted the fold of her slacks, and clasped her hands in her lap. But she could feel him. The weight of his irritation burned like a small fire beside her. He shifted in his seat. His elbow bumped the shared armrest hard and stayed there. She didn't flinch, but her fingers tensed ever so slightly in her lap. The aircraft pushed back from the gate. The familiar hum of hydraulics filled the air. Flight attendants moved swiftly down the aisle, closing overhead bins and confirming seat belts. The captain's voice echoed overhead, warm and practiced, welcoming everyone aboard Aerovia Flight 2261 bound for San Francisco. Danica stared straight ahead, her gaze steady, but inside, her thoughts swirled like clouds. Why didn't I speak louder? Why didn't I just call him out? Why did I let it happen again? These questions weren't new. They were old companions, worn and weathered. She'd met them in boardrooms, in restaurants, in elevators where she was mistaken for an assistant, never the decision-maker, in rooms where her tone was dissected more than her words, in lounges where she was the only one who looked like her, and where, "Ma'am, you're not on the list" came before "hello." She didn't always respond, but she always remembered, and that memory, that quiet fire, is what kept her from losing herself. A soft chime signaled takeoff preparation. The plane began to taxi, gently rocking side to side. Danica glanced toward the window. Sunset was fading into a navy blue sky. The golden light of day had slipped behind the terminal, leaving only that dusky hue that made everything feel hushed. Maya, the flight attendant, returned. "Miss Holmes," she said, her voice soft. "Would you care for a glass of water before takeoff?" Danica nodded politely. "Thank you." Colton let out a little scoff under his breath. Maya ignored it, or pretended to. As Maya turned to retrieve the glass, Colton leaned slightly toward Danica. "You must be some executive," he muttered. "They're treating you like royalty." Danica didn't respond. "You know," he continued, voice low and bitter, "people like you've got everyone walking on eggshells. Say one wrong word and it's discrimination. Right?" She turned to him. Slowly, her voice was quiet. "No. Say one wrong word and it reveals what you've been hiding all along." Colton blinked. The words landed, not like an accusation, but like a mirror. He shifted away from her slightly, his smirk gone. She didn't need to raise her voice. She'd already said what needed to be said. Maya returned with a cool glass of water. "Here you are, ma'am." Danica nodded her thanks and took a sip. The water was chilled, crisp, clean. The plane lifted off moments later. The rumble of engines vibrated through her spine. She closed her eyes for a brief moment during ascent and took one slow breath in, and out. 30 seconds of airspace silence. When she opened her eyes, the lights had dimmed to that soft cabin glow, the one designed to soothe passengers into comfort, to make the pressurized air feel like luxury. But the tension beside her hadn't faded. Colton was on his tablet now, watching a movie, a war documentary, guns, noise, explosions. He didn't wear headphones. The volume was low, just low enough to avoid breaking any rules, but loud enough to irritate. Danica glanced sideways once. Then again, she reached for her own earbuds, slid them in slowly. She wasn't going to play that game. She opened her Kindle app, flipped to her bookmarked page, Toni Morrison, beloved, lines about memory, about what we carry, about the weight of our name and the voices of our past. She read until the food carts came rolling down the aisle. "Dinner service," Maya said cheerfully. "Beef bourguignon or lemon herb pasta." Danica smiled gently. "Pasta, please." Colton raised his hand abruptly. "I'll take the beef," he said. "But make sure it's hot this time. Not like last month when it was lukewarm." Maya's smile faltered. "Just for a second. Of course, sir." Danica watched her retreat. Something about the way Maya squared her shoulders reminded Danica of her own team of Lisa, her assistant VP, and how she had to smile through absurd boardroom demands every week. Strong women always carried a little tension in their shoulders, the kind that came from swallowing words they had every right to speak. The food arrived 10 minutes later. Colton peeled back the foil with dramatic annoyance, poked at it with his fork, then muttered. "What do they call this?" Five-star Danica ignored him. She ate slowly, savoring the lemon zest in the pasta. It wasn't spectacular, but it was satisfying, comforting, even. She was halfway through her meal when the turbulence began. It started as a soft bump, then a roll. The captain's voice crackled overhead. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've hit some light turbulence. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." The plane jostled again, more aggressive this time. Drinks shook. A few gasps sounded from behind them. Colton grabbed the armrests. "Oh, great," he muttered. "Just great. I swear, every time I fly Arovia," Danica kept her eyes forward. She had flown through worse. Storms over the Rockies, lightning over the Gulf. Turbulence didn't scare her. What scared her was how easily people lost their humanity under pressure. Suddenly, Colton's voice turned sharp. "Hey, can you help me with this?" he said, motioning to his seatbelt. Danica looked at him. "You can't. Click your seatbelt. It's jammed," he grunted. "Just help. Will you?" She leaned over slightly, careful not to touch him. "It's not jammed," she said. "You're sitting on the strap." He shifted. Click. The belt locked. "Oh," he said flatly. Danica turned back to her book. Seconds later, he muttered, "Thanks. It wasn't much, but it was something." The turbulence calmed. The cabin exhaled. Danica felt a small knot in her chest loosen. Not because Colton had said thank you, but because she hadn't become like him in the face of conflict. She had not mirrored his pettiness. She had stayed who she was. That mattered. It always did. Because power wasn't in dominance. It was in restraint, in clarity, in knowing exactly who you are, even when someone tries to shrink you down. As the cabin settled and people returned to their screens and conversations, Danica stared out the window at the night sky. Stars blinked faintly beyond the wing, somewhere down below. Cities twinkled like constellations on Earth. She thought about her parents, about the long hours her father had worked to buy his first used Ford truck, about her mother's hands, roughened from cleaning houses but always soft when they held Danica's face. She thought about all the battles they'd fought in silence, so she could sit in this seat today. She didn't owe Colton anything, but she owed them everything. Danica barely touched the dessert tray. She stirred her coffee gently, watching the steam rise in soft swirls, then set it aside untouched. She wasn't in the mood for sweets. Not tonight. Not after everything that had already unfolded at 36,000 feet. The cabin had grown quieter. Most passengers were either dozing off or watching their in-flight movies. Soft jazz played over the intercom. The overhead lights had dimmed to a pale amber glow, casting warm shadows that gave the illusion of peace. But inside Danica, thoughts churned like an ocean beneath still skies. Why was it that the more polite she was, the more entitled people like Colton seemed to become? Why did kindness, especially from women like her, black, composed, unapologetically accomplished, invite not respect, but suspicion or worse, resistance? She exhaled slowly and reached for her notebook. Not a digital one. Danica still preferred pen and paper. There was something grounding about it, about the scratch of ink on paper, about the small, quiet rebellion of taking time to think. She flipped to a fresh page and wrote, "Dignity is not always loud, but it is always remembered." She paused, then wrote again. You don't need to match someone's ignorance to prove your intelligence. These were not just words. They were principles, hard-earned, sharpened by years of subtle battles, dismissive comments disguised as humor, assumptions about her role in meetings she chaired, underestimations that somehow made victories taste bittersweet. Danica had learned early that silence, used well, was power. But it only worked if you knew exactly when to break it. Across the aisle, Colton was sleeping now, his mouth slightly open. His tablet slipped to the side of his seat, playing a nature documentary on mute. Danica studied his face, not with judgment, but with a strange curiosity. There was nothing particularly unusual about his features. He could have been anyone, a neighbor, a client, a PTA parent, and maybe that was the point. The danger wasn't always in the obvious villains. Sometimes it was in the everyday man, the one who never had to consider what it meant to walk into a room and be questioned before he spoke, the one who assumed space was his unless told otherwise. Maya approached quietly with a small tray. "Would you like anything before lights out?" she whispered. Danica looked up. "Just some tea, if that's okay. Chamomile." "Of course," Maya said with a warm smile. "I'll be right back." Danica admired her professionalism, the way she balanced composure and care. She could tell Maya had been through her own battles navigating tight aisles and tighter assumptions. There was something in the way she carried herself. Poised, pleasant, but never submissive. When Maya returned with the tea, Danica reached out and gently touched her wrist. "Thank you." Truly. Maya looked surprised, then softened. "We don't always get that from people in first class," she admitted, voice low. Danica smiled knowingly. "I understand." There was a quiet moment between them, a shared recognition, not of pain but of endurance. Danica sipped the tea slowly, warm, floral, calming. Then she glanced toward the front of the cabin and paused. A man in a Navy uniform stood in the galley, speaking quietly with the purser. His presence was subtle but unmistakable. The insignia on his lapel matched Arovia executive staff, and Danica knew all of them, except him. Her eyes narrowed slightly. The purser gestured discreetly toward Danica's seat. The man nodded once. She set down her tea. Seconds later, he was standing at her row. "Ms. Holmes," he said softly. "Apologies for the late interruption. I'm Andre Michaels, Director of Internal Operations. May I sit for a moment?" Danica nodded slowly. "Of course." He slid into the jump seat across from her, folding his hands in his lap. "I'm here on board tonight conducting unannounced evaluations. It's a quarterly protocol, as you know. I've been observing crew interaction and passenger response." Danica raised an eyebrow. "And what have you observed?" Andre glanced briefly toward Colton's seat, then back at her. "I saw what happened during boarding. I also watched the footage recorded from the forward cabin camera." Danica's eyes didn't flinch, but her jaw tightened. "I was preparing to intervene." Andre continued, "But I also know you, and I sensed you wanted to see how far it would go." Danica gave a slow nod. "You assumed correctly." He hesitated. "There's been a pattern," he said finally. "Not just with that passenger, with certain crew members across multiple flights. Subtle, but consistent." Danica folded her arms. "Is Karen Lasky one of them?" she asked quietly. Andre looked surprised. "You know her. I remember names." Danica replied, "Especially ones that call me ma'am, like I don't belong." Andre looked genuinely unsettled. "Would you like me to speak with her now?" Danica paused. She looked around the cabin, at the sleeping passengers, at the quiet glow of the overhead lights, at Maya, who moved gracefully between rows, checking on an elderly couple. "No," she said. Andre blinked. "No, not yet," Danica clarified. "Let her finish the flight. Let her believe no one noticed. Sometimes the quietest accountability is the kind you never see coming." Andre studied her, then nodded slowly. "I'll schedule a full internal review," he said, "and I'll keep you updated." Danica reached for her tea again. "Thank you. But let me be clear, this isn't about revenge. It's about repair. I don't want apologies. I want change, real change, one that can't be erased when the press stops paying attention." Andre's face turned serious. "I understand." She sipped her tea again. Then said quietly, "We need to stop managing racism like it's a customer service problem." Andre didn't speak, but he looked like a man who had been handed a truth he couldn't unhear. Danica leaned back slightly, her spine relaxed, not completely, but enough to signal that, for tonight, she would rest. Andre stood and gave a respectful nod before returning to the galley. Danica's eyes drifted toward the window again. She thought about how far she'd come, from that little girl who used to trace maps on her bedroom wall, dreaming of flying far away, to the woman now writing those routes into corporate policy. She wasn't just passing through the sky anymore. She was shaping it. The clouds outside rolled gently below the wing, soft and infinite. She closed her eyes and whispered under her breath, "I'm still here," and somehow that felt like a victory. Danica was just beginning to drift when the turbulence started. A soft jolt, then another, the kind that makes window shades flutter and glasses on the service cart rattle like bones. The overhead lights flickered briefly, then steadied. Captain Ramos came over the speaker, his voice calm but firm. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're entering a pocket of rough air. Please remain seated with your seat belts fastened. Flight attendants, secure the cabin." Danica's eyes blinked open. Her fingers instinctively reached for the armrest. Across from her, Colton was now wide awake, gripping the edge of his seat like it might disappear beneath him. The irony didn't escape her. Here was a man who swaggered through life, demanding space like it was his birthright, now shaken by something as untamable as weather. The plane rocked again, not violently but enough to remind everyone aboard that they were small, that above the clouds, wealth, race, and arrogance did not buy control. Danica took a breath and exhaled slowly. She was not afraid. She'd flown through worse, but she was alert. Maya moved with careful grace, checking overhead compartments and guiding passengers back to their seats. When she passed Danica, their eyes met. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Another dip, sharper this time. A murmur spread through the cabin. A baby started crying in coach. Someone gasped. Colton cursed under his breath, then stillness, just for a moment. And in that pause, Danica heard the strange rhythm of her own heart, steady but not at ease. The seatbelt sign chimed on again. She leaned back, watching the curtain that separated first class from the rest of the cabin sway with each shift of the aircraft. That flimsy curtain, barely thicker than linen, was all that divided luxury from struggle, quiet from chaos, assumption from reality. How many people back there, she wondered, had been judged for how they dressed, how they spoke, how they held their children or clutched their bags? How many had stories that would never be believed unless shouted? She knew that feeling too well. Suddenly, the curtain snapped open. A young flight attendant, not Maya, emerged, panic flashing across her features. She whispered something quickly to Karen, who straightened, narrowed her eyes, and then stormed toward the rear of the plane. Maya followed. Danica's pulse quickened. Andre returned a few minutes later, walking directly to Danica. "I may need your help," he said under his breath. Danica blinked. "With what?" "There's been an incident. Mid-cabin, a man tried to swap seats with a woman during turbulence, claiming she looked uncomfortable in the emergency exit row. She didn't ask for help. She asked him to sit down. He refused." Danica's voice was low and even. Was she black? Andre nodded grimly. Yes. Traveling with her son. 10, maybe 11. Danica's lips pressed into a thin line. And now she's shaken. We're calming things down, but the passenger is now accusing her of being aggressive. Sound familiar, Danica's jaw clenched. "Let's go," she said. They moved quietly through the curtain and into the cabin. The hum of whispered voices filled the space like fog. Danica could feel every eye follow her, though most passengers pretended to look elsewhere. Row 18. A young black woman sat stiffly in her seat, her eyes bright with held-back tears. Her son leaned into her, clutching a plush toy against his chest. Standing in the aisle, a tall white man with a beard gestured animatedly at Maya and Karen. "I was just trying to help," he insisted. She looked overwhelmed. "She was fine," Maya replied sharply. Karen, in contrast, folded her arms. "Sir, your concern is noted, but you ignored a direct request to return to your seat." Danica stepped in. "Excuse me," she said calmly. "Is there a problem here?" The man turned, ready to argue, then faltered. Maybe it was the calm steel in her voice. Maybe it was the authority in her posture. Or maybe he simply didn't expect a black woman in a tailored Navy suit to command space like she belonged in a boardroom, not just on a plane. He shifted uncomfortably. "Who are you? Someone who's tired of watching the same story play out?" She replied. The woman in the seat looked up at Danica with a flicker of relief in her eyes. Danica crouched slightly so she could speak at eye level with the boy. "Hey there," she said gently. "What's your name?" "Micah," he whispered. "You okay?" He nodded, but it was that kind of nod kids give when they think they're supposed to be strong. Danica turned to his mother. "I'm Danica. I'm with the airline. I saw everything from the start. You didn't do anything wrong." The mother's lips quivered. She blinked fast. "They always say I'm overreacting," she murmured, "that I read too much into things." "You're not," Danica said quietly. "You're not imagining this, and you're not alone." Andre stepped in beside her. "We'll be formally documenting this when we land, but right now, we want to make sure you're okay." The woman nodded slowly. Danica stood and turned to the man. "You will return to your seat. You will not speak to this passenger again, and when we land, someone from legal will be waiting for you." His face flushed. "I didn't do anything. You ignored boundaries. You ignored consent. And now, you're being held accountable. That's what you did." He sputtered something under his breath but turned and walked away, shoulders hunched. Danica turned to Karen. "You knew this was escalating. Why didn't you intervene?" Karen glanced away. "I didn't want to escalate things further." Danica didn't blink. "Let me be very clear," she said evenly. "De-escalation doesn't mean silence in the face of injustice. It means protecting the vulnerable, not appeasing the entitled." She didn't wait for a reply. As they made their way back to first class, Maya whispered, "Thank you." Danica shook her head. "Thank you for not staying silent." Back in her seat, Danica sat down slowly, heart pounding not from fear, but from fury that still simmered beneath her ribs. But beneath that, something else stirred, something steadier. Resolve. They were just a few hours from landing, but this flight was already rewriting the skies. Danica stared at the seatback screen in front of her, but she wasn't watching the movie. The images flickered, soundless, as her mind looped through what had just happened in row 18. The boy's frightened eyes, his mother's trembling hands, the false indignation of the man who saw himself as a savior but played the aggressor. She had hoped the worst part of the flight was behind her, that Colton's entitled snatch of her seat would be the peak of absurdity. But the plane, like the world it mirrored, had other plans. Maya returned to first class, setting a glass of water gently on Danica's tray table. "You okay?" she asked. Danica gave a small smile. "I should be asking you that." Maya folded her arms and leaned slightly closer. "You know what's wild? I've worked this route for 3 years. Every time there's turbulence of any kind, it's not the weather that scares me." Danica looked up. "It's what people feel entitled to do in the chaos." Maya continued. "Something shakes, and suddenly they think the rules don't apply, especially to people like her, like us." Danica nodded. "You handled it well." Maya looked down. "I was scared, not of him, of how it would be spun if I stepped in harder." Flight attendant overreacts. Woman causes disruption. You know the headlines. Danica's throat tightened. "I do." For a few seconds, they both sat in that shared silence, the kind you only hear between women who've learned how to take deep breaths before every conversation that matters. Then Maya asked quietly, "Do you ever get tired of fighting it?" Danica didn't answer right away. She looked out the window. The clouds outside were tinted lavender now, softening as they descended toward evening. The sky looked peaceful, deceptively so. "I do," she finally said. "Some mornings I wake up and wonder how much of my life I've spent translating my tone so I won't be labeled angry, or smiling just enough in the boardroom to disarm the men who call me intimidating behind closed doors." She paused. "But then someone like that woman in row 18 looks up and sees me sitting here, not apologizing for it. That's when I remember. The fight is still worth it." Maya touched her shoulder gently. "You reminded her she wasn't alone." Danica took a sip of water. Her chest still carried a tremor that had nothing to do with turbulence. Colton, who had kept mostly quiet for the past hour, finally shifted and spoke. "So now you're the moral compass of the skies." Danica didn't turn her head. "That's rich, coming from the man who mistook his ego for a boarding pass." Colton chuckled under his breath. "You always did think too much of yourself." Danica turned now, not fast, not dramatic, just steady. "And you always relied on everyone else thinking too little of me." He raised his brows, still playing the victim. She held his gaze. "No, Colton, I'm rewriting the ending." He laughed, but there was no warmth in it, just the rattle of someone who had lost control and didn't know where to place the blame. "I don't know what fantasy you're chasing, Danica," he said, "but when we land, reality's going to hit. You're not as invincible as you think." Danica leaned back, folding her hands in her lap. "Neither are you," she said softly. For a moment, he looked like he might say something more, but he turned his face to the window instead. Danica exhaled. She didn't need to win every argument. She just needed to stay rooted. As the lights dimmed for the evening portion of the flight, a quiet stillness settled over the cabin. Passengers adjusted their seats. Flight attendants prepared for the dinner service. From the galley, the smell of reheated pasta and warm bread began to waft through the air. But Danica couldn't eat. Instead, she opened her notebook. She always traveled with it, a leather-bound moleskin, its edges worn from years of flights and hotel lobbies. In it, she wrote things she never said aloud: questions, reflections, the names of women who'd come before her. Tonight, she flipped to a fresh page and began to write what happens when the sky becomes a mirror. She paused, when we are 30,000 feet above the noise, and the noise still finds us. She kept writing. Do we speak? Do we stay silent? Do we explain our worth again and again, or let the silence speak for us? The pen moved like it had its own rhythm, fueled by a storm she had learned long ago to sail through. Halfway through her thoughts, Andre returned to her row. Quick update, he said, lowering his voice. We've flagged the incident for post-flight escalation. I also contacted ground ops. There'll be a formal review panel. You'll be briefed after landing. Danica nodded. There's something else, he added. Karen filed an informal complaint. Danica raised an eyebrow. Against whom you... A pause. Danica almost laughed. Almost? She claims you intimidated crew and overstepped your authority in flight. Danica blinked slowly, then smiled without humor. Of course she did. Andre scratched the back of his neck. It won't go anywhere. But I thought you should hear it from me. Danica didn't respond for a moment. Her mind was already spinning through possibilities, outcomes, strategies. She had faced this before. The paper trail of plausible deniability, the whispers in executive rooms, the coded language of retaliation masked as protocol. Thank you, she finally said, for letting me know. You sure you're okay? He asked. I'm sure, she said, but her voice sounded far away to even herself. After he left, Danica sat in stillness. For the first time on the flight, she allowed herself to feel the weight of it all, the layers, not just the incident, but the accumulation of it, the years, the restraint, the way she had to modulate herself so often that sometimes she wasn't sure where her true tone even lived anymore. She remembered a conversation with her mother once. Danica had been 15, called too bossy at school, told she was too intense when she corrected a teacher on a math equation. Her mother had cupped her face and said, "Baby, the world's gonna ask you to shrink 1,000 times. Learn when to say no." Danica had said yes to too many things in her life, too many false apologies, too many silences that stretched like bruises. But not this time. Not tonight. She opened her notebook again and wrote in bold, careful print. Next time they ask me to shrink, I'll show them how I fly. She closed the notebook, leaned back in her seat, let the hum of the engines become a kind of lullaby. Outside, the stars blinked through thin patches of cloud, and inside, Danica Holmes, black woman, CEO, daughter of a teacher, wielder of quiet storms, let herself rest, because the fight wasn't over, but she was ready. Danica awoke not from sleep, but from stillness, the kind that comes when the body shuts down for preservation. Not peace. Her eyes fluttered open to soft overhead lights. Outside the window, night had fully claimed the sky. Clouds shimmered under moonlight, endless and cold. She sat upright slowly, blinking away the weight on her chest. Her notebook remained where she'd left it, open like a question waiting for an answer. But tonight, answers were few and fragile. Maya returned with a quiet grace, her smile polite but faded. "There's movement in the back," she said. "Karen's been talking to a few passengers. Subtle, but you should know." Danica's voice was calm. "What is she saying?" "Framing you as confrontational, suggesting you disrupted crew procedures and are being investigated." She didn't name you outright, but she didn't need to. Danica took a slow breath. "Is anyone believing it?" "Some. The ones already inclined to see you as the problem." A familiar ache spread through Danica's spine, like ice settling deep in old bones, not physical pain perception pain, The kind you get when you realize a single whisper can undo years of grace, composure, and careful boundary walking. "Let them talk," Danica said quietly. Maya tilted her head. "You sure?" Danica looked over the cabin. She could feel it, now that invisible shift. The woman, 2 rows down, no longer smiled at her when passing. The man near the bulkhead, who once looked at her with recognition, now avoided eye contact. No confrontation, just distance. Subtle, calculated, deep. The stain of suspicion didn't need proof. It only needed suggestion. "I'm used to it," Danica said. "It's what they do when they can't explain why someone like me is in a place they never expected me to be." Maya leaned closer. "You're not alone in this. Don't carry it like you are." Danica nodded, but the truth settled heavily on her chest anyway. Later, Andre reappeared. His face was tense now. No more polite detachment. Something had shifted. "I just got an update from our legal team," he said. "Karen filed a formal complaint with time-stamped annotations. She's claiming that your presence interfered with cabin operations and created a hostile work environment." Danica's lips parted, then closed again. Andre added, "And she said she didn't know you were on the board." Of course she did. Everyone who worked at Aerovia knew Danica Holmes. Her face had been featured on corporate newsletters, the quarterly reports, the Meet the Visionaries campaign. But pretending not to know was strategic. It painted Karen as impartial, just a hard-working flight attendant dealing with a difficult passenger. "Did she say anything about Micah's mother?" Danica asked. She framed it as a misunderstanding, said she was simply enforcing policy. Danica pressed her fingers together. That woman was being harassed by a man twice her size, and Karen treated her like the problem. "I know," Andre said. Danica turned to him, her tone sharpening. "So what is corporate going to do about it?" Andre hesitated. "Technically, I am corporate." She stared at him. He continued, "Danica, I'm on your side. But right now, this isn't just about you. There's a ripple effect. PR is watching, legal is spooked, and your role complicates things." Danica raised a brow. "How so you're not just a passenger? You're an executive director. If we're seen as favoring you, it looks like bias. If we investigate you, it looks like betrayal. Either way, someone's gonna bleed." Danica's jaw clenched. "So, what do you recommend? That I sit quietly while someone fabricates a narrative to protect their ego?" Andre sighed. "I'm saying, be strategic." That word again, strategic, a knife dressed in logic. She leaned forward. "Andre, do you know how many times I've been strategic in my life? How many meetings I've walked into smiling while swallowing rage? How often I've worded my emails like lullabies just to avoid being labeled difficult?" He said nothing. "I'm not doing that tonight." She finished. Maya returned then, her steps quick and urgent. "There's something you need to see," she said, holding up her device. She showed Danica a private message from a fellow flight attendant. It was a screenshot of a group chat between Karen and a few crew members. Danica read, "She's pulling the race card." Typical. Funny how they act like royalty the moment they sit in first class. Another message below bet, "She's recording us right now for a lawsuit." They always do that, play the victim and cash in. Danica's vision blurred not with tears, but fury. "Do they know who I am?" she asked. "No," Maya said. "They don't care." Andre read over her shoulder and paled. "I'll forward this to legal," he said. "Do that," Danica said, her voice cold. "And tell them they're not dealing with a PR nightmare. They're dealing with a civil rights breach." Andre left quickly, his posture tense. Danica sat back and exhaled slowly. Her eyes burned, but she wouldn't cry. Not here. Not for them. Instead, she reached into her carry-on and pulled out a folder. Inside were documents, reports, and personal letters, testimonials from young girls who'd written to her after seeing her speak. "You helped me believe I belonged in rooms I thought were off limits. Because of you. I'm applying to college. I didn't know black women could be CEOs until I saw your face." She read a few of them, reminding herself who she was beyond this moment. And then, as if summoned by her resolve, Micah's mother quietly approached her. "Miss Holmes," she said. Danica looked up. "I just wanted to thank you." Danica softened. "You don't have to. I do," she replied. "You spoke when no one else did. You risked your comfort for mine. My son, he saw that. He won't forget it." Danica gently touched her hand. "Neither will I." The woman smiled. "Whatever they say, you didn't just sit in that seat. You earned it, and they're terrified because they can't take it from you." Danica's breath caught. The woman returned to her seat, and Danica stared down at her hands. They were trembling, but they were steady enough to hold a pen. She opened her notebook one more time and wrote, "Let them file complaints. Let them whisper. Let them plot. I am not the storm they expected. I am the sky learning not to yield." The cabin lights had dimmed to a hush. Some passengers drifted in and out of sleep, their heads bobbing gently with turbulence. Others wore headphones, pretending the world beyond their seats didn't exist. The mood had grown subdued, not from rest but retreat. A quiet, collective agreement not to ask questions, not to stir the air already thick with tension. Danica sat still, her spine straight, her breathing measured. Outside the window, streaks of early light glinted over clouds like bruised velvet. Dawn hadn't broken yet, but it hovered just beneath the horizon, ready to rise. Maya handed her a warm towel and a cup of chamomile tea. "I figured you hadn't slept," she said. Danica offered a tired smile. "You figured right." Maya sat beside her, resting one hand on the edge of the seat. "There's something eerie about these hours," she said softly. "The world feels paused, like it's holding its breath." Danica nodded. "It is." Maya hesitated. "Legal's drafting an official incident log. Andre told me they're preparing for multiple press scenarios once we land." Danica exhaled slowly. "Of course they are. They're not sure if Karen leaked anything already, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's circulating by now." Danica didn't flinch. "Let it circulate." Maya looked at her closely. "Are you ready for what happens after this?" Danica sipped the tea, its warmth grounding her. Being ready was never the question. She said, "The question is, how far am I willing to go?" She didn't say it with malice. There was no heat in her tone, just a quiet certainty. A woman who had measured the cost of her dignity many times and decided it wasn't up for sale. Moments later, Andre returned, his suit wrinkled from long hours, eyes sunken with fatigue. He looked like a man caught between storm clouds, one step too close to lightning, one step too far from safety. "We're beginning our descent soon," he said. "Customs and security have been briefed. We've isolated the communications between Karen and her group. Internal review is now mandatory." Danica tilted her head. "Will that include?" Colton Andre hesitated. Danica didn't wait. He incited a verbal altercation with a mother and child. He attempted to intimidate me in my seat, and he spoke with Karen mid-flight in a way that was, let's just say, not professionally neutral. Andre nodded slowly. I'll make sure his behavior's on record. Danica leaned forward. He needs to be more than on record. He needs to be accountable. That man didn't just violate decorum, he violated human decency. Andre's eyes softened. You're right. I'll handle it. She gave a small, grateful nod. Then, silence. Andre lingered, his hands folded in front of him, as if caught between protocol and apology. Danica raised an eyebrow. Something else. He looked at her, voice lower. Danica, I've worked with this airline for 12 years. I've seen crises, crashes, labor strikes, engine failures, but this, he hesitated. This feels like a reckoning. Danica met his gaze. It is, and with that, he left, alone again. Danica closed her eyes and leaned her head back. But sleep wouldn't come. Not here. Not now. Instead, her mind wandered to her first flight as a child. She had been 8 years old. Her mother, arms wrapped tightly around her, had whispered, "The sky belongs to everyone, baby girl." Even when they act like it doesn't, it had stuck with her, especially in the years when promotions went to louder men in lesser suits, when her ideas were praised only after someone else repeated them, when every boardroom felt like a test she didn't sign up to take. But she stayed, she rose, and eventually, the sky didn't just belong to her, it was her canvas. Danica opened her eyes. The cabin was shifting now. Seat belts clicked, trays locked. Flight attendants walked the aisle with practiced rhythm, checking, nodding, tucking, and then a voice came through the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We've begun our descent into New York. Weather is clear, winds are low. Local time is 6:04 a.m. Passengers stirred. Phones were turned on. The hum of transition replaced the hush of reflection. And amid it all, Karen reemerged. She walked the aisle like nothing had happened, calm, professional, all smiles, her blonde hair perfectly pinned, uniform crisp. She passed Danica's row without a glance, but Danica watched her carefully, because something had changed. Karen's performance was hollow now, her power stripped bare. She still walked tall, but it was an empty stride. Her allies were few, her story fraying. She'd played her hand too early. Maya leaned toward Danica. "She knows it's over." Danica didn't respond. She didn't need to. Instead, she pulled out a small mirror from her bag, tucked behind her tablet. She looked at herself, not vanity, but clarity. The lines near her eyes, the fullness in her gaze, not tiredness, presence. She didn't look like a woman trying to prove anything. She looked like a woman who already had, as wheels touched tarmac and the plane jolted forward with a low rumble. Danica kept her eyes forward. Micah's mother glanced back from her seat in 18C and offered the smallest of smiles. Micah was asleep against her shoulder, his mouth slightly open, clutching a crumpled juice box. Danica smiled in return. It was enough. The fastened seatbelt sign dinged off. Passengers stood too quickly, eager to reclaim the illusion of control, but Danica stayed seated, still watching, listening, feeling every vibration in her bones, because some landings aren't just about arrival, they're about declaration. She reached for her briefcase, clicked it open, and pulled out a manila folder marked Equity Initiative, Q3. Maya tilted her head. "You're working already." Danica smiled faintly. "This isn't work. It's the beginning. The cabin doors opened, sunlight streamed in, and for the first time in hours, Danica stood. She adjusted her blazer, smoothed her braid, lifted her chin. Then she stepped into the light. Not as a victim, not as a passenger, but as the woman they'd tried to erase and failed. The tarmac waited, so did the world. And Danica Holmes was ready. Danica Holmes hadn't planned on facing cameras before breakfast, but life had never asked for her permission. She stepped through the jet bridge as the first rays of morning sun bled across the New York skyline, her heels steady against the echoing floor. Her blazer clung to her shoulders like armor, and her face remained unreadable, an intentional blank slate. Waiting on the other side were 3 men in dark suits and a woman in a gray windbreaker with an Aerovia ID clipped to her collar. Andre Michaels stood just behind them, phone in one hand, voice low as he coordinated security protocol. Danica offered a nod. "Where are they?" Andre motioned with his head. "Terminal B. Press is already gathered. We're routing passengers around them for now, but your face is already online." Danica sighed. It was inevitable. "You still have a choice," he said gently. "We can escort you to the executive entrance. We can shield you for now. Buy time." She looked at him, eyes steady. "No," she said. "I'm not hiding. That's what they expect us to do. Retreat, shrink, disappear behind PR." Andre didn't argue. He only stepped aside. As Danica walked forward, the hum of the terminal rose around her rolling wheels. Distant announcements, the smell of cheap coffee and concrete, familiar chaos. But just past the glass doors, the scene shifted. Cameras, microphones, boom mics swinging like fishing lines, a huddle of reporters held back by ropes and guards, yet buzzing like bees around a queen they couldn't reach. Ms. Holmes, was it racially motivated? Did the flight attendant really touch you? Is it true you grounded the aircraft? Did you abuse your power as CEO? Danica paused just beyond the threshold. The questions tumbled over each other, messy and sharp, but she didn't flinch. She waited, let the noise swell, then she raised a hand. Only one. The noise stopped like someone had flipped a switch. Danica looked out across the crowd. Not just reporters. There were bystanders too, some filming, others just curious. But within that sea of unfamiliar faces, one caught her eye. Micah. He was standing beside his mother a few feet behind the line, holding a small cardboard sign scribbled in his child's handwriting. "Thank you, Miss D." Danica's heart cracked open just a little. She turned back to the crowd. "My name," she began calmly, "is Danica Holmes. I'm the CEO of Aerovia Airlines. And yes, this flight was grounded by my authority." The cameras blinked rapidly. "I did not make that decision lightly. I did it because I believe in something more important than our arrival time. I believe in human dignity." A few murmurs. She continued. "On flight 237, I was asked to give up my seat, not because I was disruptive, not because I had violated any policy, but because someone in a uniform believed a white man's presence was more important than a black woman's right to remain seated." No one interrupted now. Danica's voice held no anger, only clarity. Discrimination in the skies doesn't begin with slurs. It begins with assumptions, with whose comfort matters most, with whose presence is questioned first. And I will not allow those assumptions to define this airline or this moment. Someone lowered a camera. Someone else whispered, "Wow." She paused. I grounded the plane because I knew we had to stop pretending this was normal. I wanted every person on board to remember what it feels like to stand still and ask why we let these things keep happening. More silence. She finished quietly. I will take full responsibility for my actions, but I will not apologize for defending what is right. Danica stepped back. A few reporters yelled more questions, but they were softer now, less like interrogation, more like curiosity. Andre approached and gently guided her toward the side corridor. Maya was waiting near the security doors with a tall coffee and a wrapped muffin. Your voice shook the terminal, Maya said with a half smile. Danica took the coffee. Good. Maybe it'll rattle a few boardrooms next. They moved down the hallway toward the private executive wing, but Danica could feel the change in the air. Not victory, not yet, but motion. And sometimes, motion was the beginning of everything. Inside the boardroom, the temperature dropped. 10 directors sat in leather chairs, their faces tight with questions they hadn't dared ask last night. The usual greetings were skipped. The screen behind them was already flashing headlines. Black CEO grounds flight amid discrimination allegation. Holmes strikes back, Aerovia turbulence goes viral. Power, race, and 30,000 feet. What happened on Flight 237? Danica took her seat at the head of the table. No one offered her coffee. We have a situation, said Greg Temple, the chief legal officer. Danica folded her hands. No, Greg, we have a truth. What we do with it, that's the situation. Greg didn't respond. Juliet Morton, head of public affairs, leaned forward. We're fielding over 500 press inquiries. Staff involved have already been placed on leave. Karen Lasky has hired representation. Danica nodded. Expected. One of the older board members, Alan Fraser, cleared his throat. Danica, we support you. But was ground in the plane really the only option? Danica met his gaze. Would you have asked that if it were your dignity being removed at 38,000 feet? Fraser's mouth closed. I know what I risked, she said calmly. Shareholder confidence, stock volatility, even legal scrutiny. But I also know what I protected. She stood slowly and walked to the window, watching the tarmac where her flight had landed just hours ago. I protected a mother and her son. I protected my staff who have been silenced for years. I protected the soul of this company. Because without that, Alan, all your numbers mean nothing. No one spoke. Danica turned back to them. I'm not asking for permission. I'm telling you where this company's going. Juliet swallowed. And where is that? Exactly, Danica smiled. Not smug, but strong. Toward accountability, toward equity, toward a future where the sky belongs to everyone again. She placed a folder on the table, the flight equity plan. She said, mandatory bias training, real-time incident reporting, anonymous passenger feedback, and a partnership with national civil rights organizations to audit our service standards quarterly. The board members looked through the pages, slowly realizing this wasn't a temporary storm, it was a permanent shift. Andre leaned forward, voice quiet. This could be your legacy. Danica, she shook her head. No, she said, this has to be more than mine. It has to be all of ours. Outside. Micah and his mother had already gone, but Danica carried his sign in her heart. Thank you, Miss D. That was legacy enough. The boardroom had barely emptied when the real resistance began. Danica Holmes stood in the silence of her office, high above Terminal 4, staring at the city lights through the glass. Beneath her, the hum of operations moved like a distant engine baggage carts, pushbacks, arrivals, but inside her gut, a different hum had begun, uneasy, low, and growing louder. The headlines had done their work. A surge in public support had come in fast. Social media praised her courage. National outlets asked for interviews. Influencers posted clips from her impromptu speech, calling her the voice aviation needed. But within the walls of Aerovia, something colder had taken root. Not confrontation, not outrage, worse, silence. People were suddenly unavailable. Emails went unreturned. Key department heads canceled meetings with vague excuses. When Danica walked the floor of operations, voices dropped, smiles became tight. It wasn't rebellion, it was retreat. And that, she knew, was how systems survived. Not through shouting, but through whispered doubt. She opened her laptop and scanned the daily engagement report. Numbers were steady, passengers were still flying, but deeper in the data. She noticed something else. 2 department heads had submitted early retirement notices. Both had served under the prior CEO. Both had managed legacy HR teams. Maya knocked gently before entering. She carried a tray with 2 mugs and a half-eaten blueberry scone. "I figured you hadn't eaten," Maya said. Danica sat. "Thank you. I forget sometimes. You forget on purpose." Danica smiled faintly. "You're not wrong." They sat in silence for a moment, sipping the lukewarm coffee, the kind that tasted like effort more than comfort. "Something's happening," Danica said finally. "I know," Maya replied. "They're pulling away. Not all of them, but enough. Like they're waiting to see if I'll stumble." Maya nodded. Change doesn't just anger people. It scares them. Even the ones who claim they want it. Danica looked down at her mug. "I expected backlash. I didn't expect abandonment." Maya's voice softened. "That's what makes you dangerous. You're not storming in with rage. You're building something quietly. That's harder to fight, so they pretend not to see it." Danica exhaled, a slow, measured breath. "I need allies," she said. "Not just you and Andre. I need people in rooms I'm not in. People who believe in this enough to fight for it when I'm not looking." "You have more than you think," Maya said, "but some of them need permission to speak." Danica leaned forward. "Then we give them that. We don't wait." She reached for her phone and opened the internal messaging app. Within seconds, she began typing a message addressed to all Aerovia staff pilots, engineers, flight attendants, ground crew, customer service. "Good evening, Aerovia team. I want to speak to you directly, not as a CEO, but as a colleague, a fellow traveler. Some of you may feel uncertain. Some of you may wonder what's changing and why. So let me tell you, this company is becoming something better. And not because of me, because of us. Because we are tired of old rules written in shadows. Because we are ready to be more than silent observers. You're not being asked to agree with every decision, but I'm inviting you to join something larger than comfort. You have permission to speak. You have permission to believe that justice belongs in every cabin, not just courtrooms. Let's meet not in memos, but in person. I'll be hosting open forums across departments starting next week. No filters, no press, just voices, and I'll be the first to listen." She pressed send. Maya watched the screen flash confirmation. "That was brave," she said. Danica shook her head. "That was overdue. Over the next 24 hours. The company shifted again, but not in the way Danica had feared. The silence didn't deepen. It cracked. her inbox filled with hundreds of responses, not all supportive, but all honest. A black gate agent from Houston wrote, "I've been asked for ID while wearing the company uniform. Thank you for seeing that." A senior pilot from Chicago added, "I don't agree with grounding the flight, but I've seen good people pushed out over race and gender. Maybe this opens the door." A mechanic in Miami said, "No one ever asked us what it feels like working here." "I'll be at that forum." Danica read each one. Some were only a sentence long. Some were full essays of pain, longing, and frustration, but each one carried weight. She wasn't alone. She never had been. It was just that so many had been waiting for permission. That night, she arrived early to the first listening session, a converted conference room near the operations hangar. Only 5 people showed up. At first, a young Latina woman from the baggage team sat in the back, arms crossed. A non-binary flight attendant nervously smoothed their Aerovia scarf. A middle-aged white man from logistics looked hesitant, like he'd walked into the wrong room. Danica didn't start with a speech. She started with a chair. She pulled it into the center of the circle, sat down, and said softly, "You go first." They hesitated. Then the scarf-wearing attendant whispered, "I've been misgendered on flights for 3 years, reported it 5 times. HR called me sensitive." The man from logistics shifted in his seat. "My daughter's black," he said slowly. "She applied here last year, didn't even get a call back. She had a master's degree." The Latina woman's voice cut through. "My brother's in a wheelchair. You ever try to get someone like him on a flight here? I have. I've cried through it." No one interrupted. Danica just nodded, held the space open. Let the truth fill it. By the end of the session, 17 people had arrived. Some didn't speak. Some spoke with tears in their eyes, but all stayed until the room emptied and the janitor arrived. As Danica walked back to her car in the dark, Maya beside her, she felt something shifting, not fast, but deeply. "Do you still think you're alone?" Maya asked. Danica shook her head. "Not anymore," she said. Tomorrow would bring more battles, more press, more legal friction. She knew Karen Lasky's attorneys were already preparing a complaint for wrongful suspension. She knew the investor board had scheduled a closed-door session without her, and she knew Colton Briggs hadn't vanished, only bided his time. But for now, the voices had begun. The whispers had turned into stories, and stories, once shared, had a power systems couldn't silence. Danica looked at the stars above the terminal. The sky had always belonged to everyone. Now, finally, it might feel that way. The knock on her office door came just before dawn. Danica Holmes, still in her navy blazer from the night before, looked up from her laptop. Her eyes were tired, but sharp. She hadn't gone home. Too much was shifting, and she could feel that something was coming. It was Andre. He looked shaken, not angry, not confused, but pale, like the blood had drained from his face. "We've got a problem," he said. Danica stood immediately. "Tell me." Andre closed the door behind him. It flagged a breach, not an external one. Internal. A leak. She narrowed her eyes. Leak of what he dropped a tablet on her desk and tapped the screen. "Every single incident report you flagged for reform. Every draft policy from the Civil Rights Compliance Task Force, the internal memo about the Equity Training Initiative. It was all downloaded yesterday and sent to an anonymous email address." Danica's voice was calm. Too calm. Who had access? Andre hesitated. 4 people, including me, including Greg, Greg Temple, her chief legal officer, trusted, sharp, loyal. At least she had thought. Danica sat, exhaling slowly. What else? Andre dropped his voice. The email was traced back to a private server in Virginia, owned by a law firm. She looked up. Who's Lasky? Vaughn and Moore, Karen Lasky's attorneys. Danica's stomach clenched. It wasn't just about saving face anymore. Karen's legal team was building a case, and now they had ammunition. Internal documents, drafts that could be twisted, context stripped, framed to make Danica look reckless, vindictive, discriminatory. Her hands tightened around the edge of her desk. Andre leaned forward. There's more. Danica nodded for him to go on. Last night, Colton Briggs hosted a closed-door dinner at the Langford Hotel. 5 board members attended, including Alan Frazier. She didn't react. Alan had walked a delicate line since the beginning. Not cruel, but cautious. The kind of man who believed change was necessary in theory, but dangerous in practice. I need to know, Danica said quietly. Do we still have the votes? Andre's silence answered for him. She rose, walked to the window. Outside, the tarmac glowed under artificial light. Planes lined up like silver ghosts. Waiting. How long do we have? They're calling an emergency board session tomorrow. Briggs is pushing for a vote of no confidence. Danica didn't flinch, but something in her chest twisted. After everything, the passengers, the policies, the pain, now came the strike. Cold, calculated, and wrapped in legal language. They wouldn't call it a coup. They'd call it a correction. She turned back to Andre. Is Greg here? Andre shook his head. Left early. Didn't say where he was going. Danica didn't ask the next question. She didn't need to. Trust, once broken, didn't need confirmation. She pressed the intercom. Maya, clear my schedule. Yes, ma'am, Maya replied. Danica grabbed her coat. I'm going to see Juliet. Juliet Morton, head of public affairs, was not a woman to take lightly. A former journalist with a mind like a razor. She'd helped Danica spin chaos into clarity before. If anyone could frame this narrative before it exploded, it was her. By the time Danica arrived at Juliet's downtown apartment, the sun had fully risen. Juliet answered the door in a silk robe, coffee in hand, and a raised eyebrow. This early you bring bad news or worse coffee, Danica didn't smile. Juliet let her in. 10 minutes later, Juliet knew everything. The leak, the dinner, the board vote. She rubbed her temples. They're not trying to destroy you, Danica. They're trying to contain you. Danica frowned. What's the difference? They want the applause, the press coverage, the illusion of progress without the cost, without the disruption. Juliet walked to her dining table and pulled out a yellow legal pad. We don't fight this on principle. We fight it with narrative. Let them call the vote. Let them raise their hands. But when they do, she underlined a sentence in red ink. We make sure the world is watching. Danica's breath caught. A press leak. Juliet nodded. Not the documents, just the truth. Controlled, framed, strategic. The day before the vote, we go public. Danica hesitated. Won't that backfire? Juliet's eyes sharpened. Not if we lead the story. You release a personal video. You don't attack. You clarify. You remind the public why this matters. You invite them into the conversation. Danica sat back. The idea was bold, risky, but it might be the only path left. Do we tell Alan? Juliet considered? No, not yet. He's still weighing his legacy. Let him feel the pressure. That night, Danica recorded the video herself. No makeup, no script, just her, seated by a window, with the city behind her. She spoke plainly about justice, about turbulence not just in the air, but in boardrooms and hearts. She didn't mention names, but she named values. She didn't call out betrayal. She called for integrity. When the video dropped the next morning, it spread like fire across the internet. Employees reposted it. Former passengers stitched their own testimonies onto it. Allies in the aviation industry sent statements of support. A national reporter asked for an exclusive. Within 4 hours, the board session was moved up. Briggs was panicking. His PR team scrambled to issue a statement. Danica arrived at headquarters calm, composed. The boardroom was full. Alan Fraser sat at the end of the table, gray suit impeccable, lips drawn in a tight line. Briggs opened the meeting with forced civility. We are here to discuss governance, risk, and stability. Given recent unilateral decisions, I move for a vote of no confidence in CEO Holmes. Silence. Then Alan spoke. I've watched Aerovia change more in 10 weeks than in 10 years. Not because of fear, but because of clarity. I watched that video this morning. I saw not a threat, but a promise. I will not be voting against Danica Holmes. Briggs went pale. 3 more board members followed Alan's lead. The vote failed. Danica remained CEO, but she didn't smile, because she knew the war wasn't over. It had only changed shape. That night, she walked through Terminal 4 quiet now, its neon glow casting long shadows on polished floors. A child in a sparkly backpack waved at her. Danica waved back. She didn't feel triumphant. She felt resolved. Leadership wasn't about surviving sabotage. It was about staying rooted. And tomorrow, she'd return to the sky because that's where change was clearest. Not in boardrooms, but 35,000 feet above. 3 months later, Danica Holmes walked onto Flight 842 from Boston to San Francisco, quietly, without fanfare. Her hair was pulled back into a sleek low bun, her coat draped neatly over her arm. The gold pin on her lapel, a simple pair of wings with the initials AH, was the only signal of her role as CEO of Aerovia Holdings. She didn't want recognition. Today, she wasn't flying to inspect, or to investigate, or to intercept chaos. She was here to remember. She paused at row 18, her eyes softening. It was empty, just as it had been that day. The seat on the aisle, 18C, was still slightly looser than the others. The cushion slanted from age and wear, but it was clean. The screen worked now. The tray table had been reinforced. A small placard rested in the seat back pocket. Not corporate, not flashy, just 4 words in embossed navy ink. Every seat has dignity. Danica exhaled. This was where it had begun, where she had been stripped of her seat, her status, and her silence. And in losing it, she'd found something louder than rank truth. She moved toward first class, where she'd been reassigned by a scrambling attendant 3 months ago after Karen Lasky's infamous mistake and subsequent dismissal. But today, Danica paused just outside the cabin curtain. She turned to the gate agent. "I'll be sitting in row 18. He blinked. "Ma'am, your ticket is for 1A. I know. Please switch it." Moments later, Danica settled back into the economy cabin. Passengers shuffled past her without a second glance. A little boy dropped a crayon by her foot. She picked it up and handed it back with a smile. A woman with tired eyes sat beside her. clearly relieved that her seatmate wasn't loud or demanding. They exchanged polite smiles. Danica leaned her head back. This wasn't about making a statement, not anymore. This was about honoring the place where change had asked her to choose between comfort and courage. And she'd chosen. The flight attendant walking the aisle wore the new Aerovia Navy uniform created under the Equity Initiative Danica had pushed through after the board vote. Each attendant now received pay transparency reports, cultural sensitivity training, and an anonymous reporting app called Wingspan, designed by Aerovia's youngest engineer, a 22-year-old black woman named Joylene Green. Danica smiled when she saw Joylene's signature logo discreetly etched on the hem of the safety cards. Progress wasn't fast, but it was real. About 40 minutes into the flight, the woman next to her, whose name was Rachel, started a conversation. Business or pleasure? Danica chuckled. Neither, really. Reflection. Rachel raised an eyebrow. That's a rare seatmate answer. Danica smiled. It's been a rare kind of year. Rachel nodded, then looked around. You know, this airline's really improved. My daughter flew last month with her wife. She was nervous, it was their honeymoon, but she said the crew was the kindest she'd ever met. Danica's heart lifted, quietly. Rachel leaned in. I don't know if you've seen, but there's this CEO video that went viral a while ago. Black woman, calm voice, talking about seats and storms and justice. You kind of remind me of her. Danica bit back a grin. You don't say? Rachel searched her face. Wait, was that you? Danica nodded gently. Rachel stared, stunned. You were the one they tried to push out of first class for that guy? And the rich guy who Danica held up a hand? Yes, but it was never about him. Rachel's eyes softened. You stayed, I did? Rachel shook her head, smiling. My daughter's going to lose her mind when I tell her I sat next to you. Danica laughed. Tell her thank you. Her seat matters too. Midway through the flight, the captain's voice came over the speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. We're currently flying at 36,000 feet and passing over the Mississippi River. It's a clear sky tonight, and I wanted to let you know something special. Our CEO, Ms. Danica Holmes, is aboard this flight. She's chosen to sit in row 18. The cabin erupted into scattered applause. Danica didn't move, didn't stand. She simply gave a small nod, then turned her eyes to the window. Outside, the clouds parted for a moment, revealing the soft glow of distant cities, scattered like pearls across a black ocean. Danica thought of Maya. She had accepted the position of head of global flight operations. Her first initiative was simple. Every crew member would spend one flight per month in economy, not as punishment, as perspective. She thought of Andre, still her fiercest protector, but now also her COO. His loyalty had never been blind, it had been grounded. She thought of Greg, fired, not publicly shamed, but quietly removed. Betrayal didn't need spectacle. It only needed truth. She thought of Juliet, still fierce, still brilliant, and still the one person who could distill chaos into 3 perfect sentences and an award-winning headline. Juliet's latest project, a podcast series titled Seats That Speak, inviting passengers to share stories of bias, bravery, and belonging. Danica herself had recorded the first episode. It began like this: I used to think justice happened in courtrooms, but I've learned it happens in cabins, in row numbers, in whispered apologies and recorded truths. and where we sit and where we're told we don't belong. As the flight descended into San Francisco, Danica felt something she hadn't in a long time. Peace, not victory, not triumph, just peace. At the gate. The passengers filed out slowly. Some nodded at her with recognition. A few whispered thank you. One child saluted her. She smiled. As she stepped into the terminal, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Maya. Row 18's placard got duplicated. We've installed it in every aircraft. It's policy now. A seat that started as pain is now protection. Danica stood still for a moment. Then she walked forward. Her steps were quiet, but steady. Tomorrow, the headlines might shift. Tomorrow, another storm might rise. But tonight, a black woman CEO returned to the seat they tried to strip from her, and she made it a legacy. Not through force, but through presence. Not with noise, but with grace. And in doing so, she gave every other passenger, on every other flight, one simple promise. You belong here. Always. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't make a scene. She simply stayed in her seat and changed the world. Danica Holmes reminded us all that justice doesn't always wear a robe. Sometimes it wears a boarding pass. This wasn't just about a seat. It was about dignity denied and dignity reclaimed. It was about every black woman who's been overlooked, every traveler who's been told they don't belong, every person who's been asked to shrink so someone else can stretch. And in that moment, 5 minutes of calm resistance, Danica gave us a blueprint for something bigger than policy. She gave us a mirror. Because when we look at how we treat one another in the smallest places in row numbers, in restaurant lines, in waiting rooms, we see who we really are. Let this story stay with you the next time you board a plane, the next time you choose silence or truth. And remember, no seat is ever just a seat. It's a test of who we stand up for and who we're willing to push aside. If this story touched you, like, share, and subscribe for more real powerful stories that shine a light on injustice and celebrate the quiet courage that changes everything. We'll see you in the next video. Stay kind, stay awake.